Today's video we have two of the oldest heavy tanks within World of Tanks console, and to see whether or not will they still hold up in today's meta of World of Tanks console. So let's have a look at what both of these tanks can do, the differences between them, and showcase one gameplay of each one in today's video. So these tanks are some of the oldest, as we've already said, and they were introduced a long time ago, which is why they probably don't stand up to today's tradition of overpowered premiums. And although they've received buffs over time, including the T-34, which has seen some buffs to both its reload speed and I believe some buffs to its mobility, it is essentially still very much a old vehicle and an old playstyle, whereby you have 400 alpha damage at tier 8 as a heavy tank, which is pretty strong. However, you do have a reduced DPM, as with a lot of these slower heavy tanks that rely on, using a turret. And this tank also has a very strong turret. It is essentially a T30 style of turret, whereby it plays very much like the T29, etc. You guys know the gist with the American heavy tanks. It has a really good penetration for a heavy vehicle, 248mm with the standard ammunition, which is amazing. And as soon as then you come up against super heavy vehicles, even 2 tiers higher than you, you can start loading the premium APCR rounds, which have 297mm of penetration with the same alpha damage. If you come up against lightly armoured vehicles, mediums with basically no armour, and of course heavy tanks and some of the tank destroyers that come in, you're able to fire HE. Primarily heavy tanks, you're going to have to fire at the back of them, which does happen occasionally, but it isn't the fastest vehicles to get round a lot of them. The Lowe, in contrast to the T-34, gets a reduced alpha damage of 320 versus the 400 on the T-34. It has 234mm of penetration with the standard rounds, so a little bit different, slightly lower with the Lowe, but the premium ammunition having 294 pen with the same alpha damage as well. HE having 60 pen with 420 alpha, good for those mediums, light tanks and back of heavy tanks, alongside some of the lightly armoured tank destroyers as well. Both tanks have a top speed of 35 kilometers an hour, putting them in a similar sort of bracket. However, the T-34, although having a much stronger turret than the Lowe, does have the weak point on top, which is the cupola, and it can be penned. And in tier 10 games, if you angle just like this, people can pen your turret as well. And it is quite a long turret, so can be penned quite easily through the side. But of course, that is the same as the Lowe. The Lowe doesn't have as long of a turret, but it does have a more prominent cupola, and the mantlet of the Lowe can also be penned by vehicles with super high penetration, so you can end up getting penned straight through the mantlet. T-34 doesn't have so much of that problem, as it's quite thick and also has armor behind it. The Lowe doesn't, so you have to be a little bit careful with this vehicle. The T-34 is slimmer profile on the hull armor, as the Lowe has a much larger, thicker profile of a kind of hull armor, and so has a much bigger lower plate. However, the upper plate is much stronger than the T-34's, and often in the T-34, if they hit your hull, they're going to pen you regardless of whether they see the upper plate, the lower plate, or even the side. Most of the hull armor is terrible. The Lowe, on the other side, has a pretty decent upper plate and can bounce a few rounds, especially at tier 8 and below. Its lower plate is garbage, so you will get penned almost every single time in that big chunky lower plate, so you want to be aware of that. Side armor, you can side scrape with the Lowe. It's quite nice at being able to do it. It gets that to typical German side armor, very flat, able to essentially side scrape out from buildings and use it very effectively. The Lowe is really good at doing this. T-34 can side scrape, however, because the side armor isn't the best, as with most of these American heavies, you'll find that you can get penned in the side, and a little bit of an over angle can cause them to basically pen you every single time in this tank. You also have quite big tracks compared to the Lowe, and they come up further on the tank, if that makes sense, which can mean you absorb more heat rounds. But at the end of the day, Lowe also has big frontal tracks, which absorb some of those rounds at the frontal drive wheel, and can provide a little bit more protection. But the T-34, for the most part, is much worse armor wise, other than the turret, and when you use the turret of the T-34, it's super strong. The gun depression of the T-34 has 10 degrees. The Lowe doesn't quite have that. It has Oh no, it does have 10 degrees. Apologies. They are both the same. However, the T-34 feels a lot easier to use that gun depression because of the fact that you're essentially able to kind of use your turret much more fluidly. And the Lowe is quite a big profile vehicle whereby those tracks come off of the ground very much. And so you can end up basically over peaking a ridgeline, and the big lower plate at the bottom can get exposed, which means that they can pen you when you're trying to use your gun depression. Sometimes if you're using them in typical positions where you can get hold down and use the gun depression, then yes, this tank is very good as well. But the T-34 definitely hits for more. Lowe's main armament has a significantly lower damage per minute than the T-34 now, which means that the T-34 is actually not the worst at being able to output damage, which is very nice. However, the Lowe does of course get that armor kind of buffs compared to the T-34. So with that being said, that's kind of a very quick rundown of both vehicles. View range wise, they're very similar, and so let's take a look at what they actually play like in game, and hopefully this will be an interesting video to see some of the oldest tanks in the game, certainly premium tanks in the game, and see how they play in 2024. So the first game that we have is the T-34 on Nebelberg, and we're going to see how we can fare in this matchup. Now, the T-34, we went ahead and 3-marked this tank a long time ago. We probably did it maybe 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I'm not quite sure, but it was a long time ago when we managed to get it. This tank was available, for those of you that might be wondering how I actually got this tank, it was available as a Twitch drop that we got as part of the kind of Prime gaming, but back then it wasn't even called that. It was like a Twitch exclusive kind of gaming drops linked to certain games, and World of Tanks console had one of those, which came alongside a essentially a kind of exclusive camo, which I believe is like an emerald camo. It was essentially this colours of Twitch, purple and stuff like that. So for those of you wondering how I managed to get the T-34, it was a long time ago for free as part of one of the exclusive events that happened. Since then, World of Tanks console has never really done anything with Twitch, which is a bit disappointing, but I believe it's probably to do with the fact that maybe it's much more difficult to get in with Twitch or something. So yeah, only the biggest of games can really get those drops, etc. So with that being said, straight away we pick up 377 damage on the old Charioteer, which is nice, but you know, not the best in the world. But hopefully we can get a couple more across throughout this game. And you'll see what a tank like this can do. The reload speed is definitely a bonus over the Lowe. It feels much more rewarding when you use a vehicle like this than the Lowe, because of course you're hitting for a hell of a lot more than the Lowe. So with that being said, you can see I don't want to push over there. There's a lot of potential campers in TDs that are going to be sat on that ridgeline, and considering not that many of the enemy team are spotted right now, I don't really want to take the chance of going up there, so that's not what we're going to do. We're going to go over down to here to give us ourselves potentially some damage against some of these guys that might be on the lower path here, and maybe we can find some shots into a couple of other opponents. Here's the Charioteer. We've also got a heavy tank that's pushing across. It's the Tiger 1, but we really need to get rid of this Charioteer, so I'm more than happy to expose myself at least once, because you know, you never know. But we're getting in a couple of free shots into the Tiger 1 there. The Charioteer is going to come around. He puts one into us, but you know, because I don't like taking damage for free, we're going to go round, and there you go. The Charioteer takes another one, putting him on a one shot, and it makes him a lot more scared of what we can do. We go for another one on the Tiger. The Charioteer is probably going to try and come around for another free shot. We're trying to make it as difficult as possible, but once again, the hull armor of this vehicle, once again, being a nuisance to try and avoid damage. Now, I am expecting to take a hit here, potentially. They hit the turret, which is brilliant, means we bounce the round, and we're up to 1800 damage so far. Now, this game, what do we do from here? Well, there's a couple of options when you're trying to push and kind of find out where the enemy tanks are on the hill. There's either A, you go to this spot here and use the turret and play a lot more passively, which I mean is good for the beginning. Maybe we can spot someone and just figure out where the rest of the enemy tanks are. Or you can try and make the push to the rock. It's directly in front of me. We've got a heavy tank here, which is the Goronich, that we could potentially get hit by. Now we find out that there's a Borsig up on the top of the rock. which is definitely going to be a problem if we try and push down. So I don't really want to do that unless it's crucial or potentially the best option out of the bunch, because yeah, we don't know what is up on the ridge. Find ourselves a Canonian Jagdpanzer, put one in him with the great accuracy. The AMX AC 46 is up there, and of course he comes back up, not quite sure why, because I mean, I don't get why you would do that. But of course now we are in a pretty weird position. We're out in the open, so what do? Well, we need to get out of the open to the majority of people. AT-15's on top of the hill. We're going to push to this rock. Hopefully we can get there without taking a shot. We put one into the AMX there on the move. The great thing about the T-34 is because it isn't the fastest vehicle, the dispersion on the move with this tank, so how big that reticle will get when you're moving, is actually pretty small, and so you can shoot on the move quite easily with this tank, which is brilliant for those of you wondering how you can hit so many shots on the move. But of course you've seen what the armor model of this tank is like. It is no longer as strong as what it used to be, with a lot of the kind of newer tanks coming out with increased penetration, trying to limit the fact that when you do get into tier 10 games that you're not going to be as impacted, I guess. And we find ourselves the Goronich here. We put one into the side of him, might as well finish him off. The SU has been taken out by one of our teammates there in the striker, which means we can push towards the hill and hopefully get a couple more shots in. Obviously, if we were going for 3 marks in this tank, it's probably at the region of like 3.5 thousand damage you need to do on average. But yeah, I don't know at this time. We did it a long time ago, before even the buffs to the damage per minute happened, where this literally had one of the worst damage per minutes of all of the heavy tanks at tier 8, making it almost unusable, to be honest with you. But I still enjoyed it then because of the accuracy and the penetration and just feeling like you can deal with a lot of tanks in the game. So now it's time to go after the Canonian Jagdpanzer 105, and so we're going to push up the hill. Hopefully we can get one into him, and maybe we could get one into the other tank destroyer that's up here. I just want one more shot of damage. Whether we're going to get that, I don't know. Hopefully. And we do. There we go. We're up to 4.3k combined, or 4.3k actual damage and 4.8k combined. There is a AMX who I would love to remove, since he's been up there and he hit us a couple times, and that's exactly what we do. 4.4 thousand damage done with 602 assistance. A pretty solid game, and definitely a vehicle that I love to play. Maybe we'll go for the 4 marks at some point, but it's been such a long time that I've played this tank that, yeah, I thought I'd showcase it to you today to show you exactly why some of the oldest tanks, even though they are so old, can still be very competitive if you get it in the right hands and you play them how they're supposed to be played. So yeah, let's jump into the Lowe now to see if that tank is as good as this one. Well then, it's Lowe time, and we're playing on Fisherman's Bay in the Lowe in this one. And the best bit about the Lowe really is that it does feel very consistent. Much like the T-34, it has a really consistent main armament. It has really good accuracy, and it also feels like you can essentially push forward and be pretty much a rock for the enemy team. However, the problem with this tank is that it does get that gigantic lower plate, and it feels like sometimes you can be on the back foot in some of your games. And so with that being said, this tank can be very powerful. It can also be very easy to take out in the game, especially if you're playing a medium tank. This tank has similar alpha to most of the medium tanks at tier 8, however has a much longer reload than a lot of those medium tanks, so you can get caught out quite hard. You can also bounce off of light tanks, which is always brilliant, and of course it wouldn't be a French light tank bouncing rounds, would it? But at the same time, you can see me pushing up to this building here. Now, I didn't go into the town in this matchup purely because of the fact that if you go into the town in a matchup like this where no one else has gone into the town, guess what? You're probably going to get hit. And this AMX 1375 has decided that he's going to try and YOLO me, and unfortunately for him, I'm not a complete bot, so he can take multiple shots for that one, even if we did bounce a few earlier. But I really want to get that guy out of the game. A YOLO wagoning at the beginning, not taking any shells, typical literal World of Tanks console player. And then the artillery comes in to dump a shell at the same time. We've then got the YOLO wagons starting to roll in the T-34-3, who's decided that it was a great idea to do the exact same as the light tank. However, he is actually getting punished, which is great for once. And rather than staying where we are, where we could get YOLO'd, I'm going to pull all the way back. Our team are essentially all sat over in the TD hill, as they probably shouldn't be, especially if we're playing in a heavy tank. I have no idea what they're all doing over there, but, you know, we move. Essentially, we've got ourselves a SU-101 who's going to be pumping us. We try and angle for this guy, but the lower plate is just so weak that even if you angle, you don't really have much of a chance of bouncing. I want to get a shot into the ISU, and then that one bounces. Brilliant, just what I wanted. And now we've got to try and deal with this AMX again. Hopefully we can get him out and not bounce this time. But there you go. A auto aim across the map against the ISU seems to pen, but when you actually fully aim, it doesn't. Fantastic. Either way, you see the armor of the Lowe has definitely held up a lot better than what you see with, for example, the T-34. There are things where you can bounce in the T-34, you just have to be hold down. If you're not hold down, you will lose your hit points. Whereas the Lowe, even when you aren't hold down, can bounce a few rounds. So with that being said, we've got to be quite careful of this SU-101 who's over there. We also want to continue to get damage. And in this sort of game, we've got quite a lot of vehicles that are all over the place. It's funny how the entirety of our team went one flank and they still gave up the most important position of that flank, which is down in the dip, allowing the stockade and things like that to push up. Unfortunately for me, I was a complete animal and decided not to actually wait until the stockade came fully out. And we end up hitting the house, which is not my intended target. So with all of that going on, we still need to keep spotting the opponents that are over on this flank, and that's why I keep poking up, cresting that ridge. It's unlikely we'll spot because this tank doesn't have great view range comparatively to its concealment, so it's unlikely we'll actually spot. But at the same time, we need to keep doing something, otherwise it's just going to be, you know, us basically sitting there waiting for someone else to do something, which if you've played any amount of World of Tanks, you'll know that if you're relying on your teammates to do something, it's probably not going to get done. So yeah, so far not a terrible game considering we've got 1,000 assistants as well, but that's primarily because of the fact that we were the furthest forward for a lot of this game, and we finish off the T-34-3. But what I'm doing here is trying to avoid this artillery hit. We're also trying to avoid any of the TDs that are in the back, but we need to make a move now to get into proper cover, and that's exactly what we do. So okay, we can breathe for a second at least. Now the Caliban is out in the open, we want to get one shot into him. We found ourselves that there is an artillery, but we don't want to prioritize this guy because we want to get the Caliban out, because that could really horribly take out a lot of our hit points. But now we get the time to remove the SU or the S51. And the Sturmil gets spotted. We can aim. Yes, we get a shot. Okay, 3.3k damage done. Nice. 1,000 assists so far. We've got an SU-101 that is still in our base and still hasn't been taken out. But the Caliban is going to be a pain. We slow down slightly on our kind of thumbstick to move forward, just so that we don't plume out as much, so we can remain accurate. And like the T-34, very accurate on the move, the Lowe, and so we can push in. And at this point, we can try and use some of that gun depression. Unfortunately, don't get any against the Sturmil because he's already gone. And the T-29 on the enemy team has pushed up to our base. So can we get a shot on him? Hopefully. Fingers crossed. But maybe we'll get some of the TD that might get spotted as well. But with that being said, the ISU does get spotted over there. He's probably going to get taken out before we can do anything. We aim and, no, I think there was a wreck in the way. So we don't hit the T-29 and he's going to go down into the dip against the artillery, which means no more damage so far for me. So even though this game did not end up in the best way possible, with a load of our team camping in a location you should never camp in, like in the amount of people that were there, giving up the best spots in the game, we still end up winning because we won the other flank against a similar sort of level of the enemy team. So more luck than judgment from the people camping at the back, and certainly we helped to win this game, at least to a degree. And there we pick up 3,500 damage, 1,000 assist with a decent amount of silver alongside, and this is one of the best crew trainers in the game because of the fact it gets an increased boost to crew XP with the Lowe Black. The T-34 also has a black version, it's just we didn't decide to play in that version for today. We do have it, but we didn't play in it. But either way, that's the Lowe, that's the T-34, both of them very, very fun tanks to play. Still relatively competitive. They're not great by any means, they are not overpowered, they are just some really nice tanks to at least try out, and maybe you have them in your garage and want to dust them off and try them out. I would recommend it. They have definitely improved over time, and the buffs have definitely helped them out to keep up with what we've currently been receiving with some of the premium tanks in this game. Other than that, if you want to watch more gameplay and tank reviews, I'll leave a playlist on screen right now that you can go and click on to see more kind of tank reviews of all of the different tanks that are in World of Tanks console, whether that's premium, tech trees, whatever. They'll all be on there. And of course, thank you very much for making it this far in this video, and I hope you join me in the next one. Goodbye.